Hello, I am Brian Washington. I am continuing our teaching presentation based on the speech The Great Dictator, which is performed by Charlie Chaplin. I will be doing this for Group 8 at Western Carolina University for COM 201 Communications class under Dr. Michael Caudill. For my portion of the presentation, I will be presenting the breakdown of the speech, which is actually the interpreting the introduction, the body, and the conclusion of the speech, as well as all of the subject matter that is covered within the speech. Also, for my part of the presentation, I will be going over what we consider the speaking attributes of the actual speaker. In other words, I will be evaluating his voice, his presence, his posture, and his eye contact, and other physical attributes notated with speech given. So, I will begin first with the actual speech and the evaluation of that, beginning with the evaluation of the introduction. For the introduction, Charlie Chaplin, it was peculiar as he was introduced in the context of the movie. He was introduced as the dictator, but once he went to the podium, he quickly, do I dare say, came down or introduced himself at a lower level in order to maintain a connection with the audience, as he quickly moved to say that he didn't want to be a dictator and he didn't want any part of that. So that was the first thing that I notated in his introduction, where he pretty much established his status to the audience. He also went on to show his concern for the other, like I say, the other people in the audience, and how he was concerned for their well-being as well. And he also introduced his topic, as I evaluated the speech, I determined his topic to be that it is human nature essentially to help one another, even though it seems in war times that had kind of been forgotten at this point in the speech. So, as Charlie Chaplin has went to show his topic, he also went on into his thesis. And his thesis seemed to be why this was a motivational speech, and we all know it was a motivational speech for the troops. It still had a central thesis to it to me, and it was that humans at this point had lost their way. Charlie Chaplin seemed to be conveying a message that hope had been lost, and a lot of things that went wrong with humanity. And to establish his main points, which we have to remember from our textbook, Choice in Communications, on page 344, it speaks that your main points must support your thesis. So Charlie Chaplin, in this case, looks like he carefully chose some topics that could support his belief that humans had lost their way. From my gathering, his main points were the greed of men had contributed to humans losing their way, the misuse of technology, evil dictators were all, and the way they were manipulating the population at the time, and also while he went through these dire topics, he also had looks like a fourth topic to me, that humans can prevail through all of this. So those are my four subjects that I picked up, and I will evaluate each one of these. So first, going with the technology. Charlie Chaplin seemed to believe that technology had actually attributed, why it could have been used to better man, it had actually been used to work against men. And he goes into making statements, Charlie Chaplin does, that we need more humanity than we do need machinery. So in other words, he felt like the machinery that was coming into context was giving a negative effect to humanity at that point. And he also goes on to say, and I quote, "The airplane and the radio has brought us closer together. The very nature of those inventions cries out for the goodness of man." So while at this point in Charlie Chaplin's eyes, or at least through the port of this speech, it seems that technology has been used to the disadvantage of man. He also points out that technology could be used to the good of man. So going into subject 2, which is the greed of men, and it's pretty simple to characterize greed. Charlie Chaplin points out that greed essentially has poisoned the soul of men, and it speaks to the systems that are in place at the time that it makes men look to torture, or as I paraphrase that, speaks of a system that makes men torture. And going into subject 3, the evil dictators themselves. And Charlie Chaplin speaks of how the evil dictators have used technology and greed to essentially to take advantage of the masses at the time. And Charlie Chaplin goes on to speak that the dictators are using people as cattle. Essentially, they have no care for the masses in general at this time. They're essentially using their lower class fellow men to make advances. And going on, Charlie Chaplin also speaks bad of the dictators, whereas he speaks that dictators fear the way of human progress, essentially, and that dictators work to free themselves, but to enslave other people. So he really goes into there as far as the impact that dictators are making on the well-being of humanity at the time. And then he goes into subject number 4, which subject number 4 kind of steps away from the previous 3 subjects of showing what has hurt mankind, where he goes into speaking of how mankind can overcome these obstacles that have been put in its place. He speaks of that all dictators eventually die, and the powers eventually return to the people. And he urges the soldiers in the audience not to fight for these evil dictators any longer, but he asks the soldiers to actually fight for liberty, which goes back to the motivational component of the speech. And while this is a different subject, kind of a little bit different from the downward turn of the first 3 subjects, this 4th subject is definitely needed to make the speech come full circle. So we get to the conclusion of the speech. So how did Charlie Chaplin wrap it all up? And he pretty much spoke that you, the people, have the power. The people had the power to create. The people had the power to create their own happiness. Their happiness was not to be handed to them by someone else, but that the people themselves should be taking it upon themselves to go out and find happiness. And he urged people to use this newfound power to create a new and better world. So we go into the contrast and comparisons that Charlie Chaplin used throughout the speech. This speech was actually laden with contrast and comparisons. Some of the examples of that was, one of the quotes that I like that he used was, "More than cleverness, we need kindness." He speaks of how men have gotten smarter, but they're using their smarts to take advantage of men as opposed to help men. And I particularly like that contrast. And he speaks to the fact that you are not machines, you are men, and that you can think free for yourself. So he's speaking to the troops, and once again speaking back to the fact they've been under this blind leadership of these dictators, but that they could take it upon themselves to think for themselves. They're not a machine. You're not programmed. You can go forward on your own with your own way of thinking. Going into topic, naturally, throughout the speech, Charlie Chaplin stayed on topic. He went, like I say, he stated his thesis, and he supported them with at least 4 ideas that I identified. He naturally, as a well-trained actor, he spoke clearly. He used proper English, and as expected and achieved, he spoke with great grammar and clearly in sentences, and he used complete sentences as well. So let's go into posture and eye contact, which to me, once again, being a trained actor, you would expect him to be able to do this. But according to our textbook on Choices 380, it's strongly encouraged to make eye contact for at least 3 seconds, not just glaringly look and don't make contact, but to actually speak to people. And that was something that I really picked up throughout the speech, that he would turn his head and he would speak strongly in one direction, and then he would turn his head and speak strongly, almost as if he was speaking to one individual at a time. And like I say, for a well-trained actor, and just through what we've learned in communications for our speech giving, he definitely met that mandate of eye contact. And he also, of course, had great posture. At the beginning, he actually seemed to come on stage as if he was, as if the speech or the moment was too big for him. But of course, that was probably more just in the context of acting, of course. But of course, throughout the speech, he gained more and more confidence, and his posture seemed to get stronger and stronger by the moment. His volume and pitch and tone. He actually spoke at a very high vocal rate. And on page 380, in Choices and Connections, once again, it's kind of embedded to not speak at such a high rate because your audience may actually lose some of the information that you're trying to give them. But for motivational purposes and to show sense of urgency within the speech, I would imagine that's probably exactly why Charlie Chaplin spoke at such a high vocal rate. And naturally, he spoke with a good tone, good strong tone to his voice. And once again, at the beginning of the speech, he started kind of low, but then he increased with his power and passion throughout the speech. So, this concludes my portion of the presentation for Group 8 for the evaluation of the Great Dictator speech. So, at this point, the speech will go back to Casey, and he can provide the conclusion for the speech. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.